I first met my ex's sister back in high school when she started going out with my best buddy. During our senior year, she got pregnant, and they tied the knot shortly after. After high school, I enlisted in the military. I served for 6 years before getting medically discharged. That's when my ex and I started dating. I landed a decent job that required me to travel a couple of times a month for up to 10 days at a stretch. While we were doing some last-minute wedding prep, a text from her sister popped up on her phone. It read, "Have you told your boyfriend about your fling with your ex? If you don't spill the beans tonight, I will tomorrow." I asked her, "What's this about?" She tried to brush it off. I kept pushing her for the truth, and she finally admitted that she had bumped into him during her bachelorette party, but insisted that nothing happened. It was a clear lie. When she fell asleep, I decided to go through her phone. I found texts and pictures with him dating back to when we first started seeing each other. They would hook up every time I was away on work trips. I sent the evidence to my phone. I woke her up, confronted her, and ended the relationship right there. She tried to play the victim, but I showed her one of the screenshots of her and her ex in my bed. I told her, "Stephanie sure looks a lot like your ex-boyfriend." She started crying, and I gently ushered her out the door. I called off all the wedding plans and enlisted some help to call the guests and inform them that the wedding was off. My friend's wife revealed that during the bachelorette party, she had caught them sneaking off together and getting intimate. She confronted them and gave my ex the choice to either confess to me herself or she would do it. She had no idea that this was an ongoing affair. Now let's talk about the honeymoon. I had planned it meticulously to make it perfect for my ex. It was a 10-day trip to a foreign country that she had always described as a once-in-a-lifetime bucket list destination. There were luxurious hotels, amazing experiences, and overall, it was her dream vacation. I had already shelled out about 10 grand for the wedding and would lose even more if I canceled the honeymoon trip. I decided to offer the trip to them. Knowing they never had a honeymoon or any real vacations since they married young and had kids, it seemed right. Plus, they just saved me a lot of money and hassle. They happily accepted. They managed to get time off work and arranged care for the kids for the duration of the trip. When my ex found out, she lost it. She bombarded me with calls and texts, calling me all sorts of names for doing this to her. She kept saying that it was her dream vacation and that I had ruined her life. I received messages from her friends and some family members she had lied to, blaming me for the breakup. Her ex even texted me, calling me less of a man, and then threatened me. He must have been with her the previous night, as he shouldn't have had my number. I haven't responded to any of them. But I'm left wondering, am I the a-hole for giving my cheating ex-fiance's dream honeymoon to her sister and my best friend? Update. The funny thing about me is that I can stay cool as a cucumber even in a war zone. But that night, I was a total wreck. I wasn't thinking straight. When you receive a barrage of messages from people you thought cared about you, it really throws you for a loop. On a positive note, I get regular checkups due to my job, including blood work. But after all this, I went and got specifically tested for any sexually transmitted infections, and thankfully, everything came back negative. I took some of your advice and got a restraining order against the other guy for his threats. It helps to have good connections with local law enforcement, I tell you. You guys were right. I didn't really have to lift a finger for the truth to come out. The night after she found out about the honeymoon, she showed up at her sister's place, banging on the door and demanding all the trip details. When she was denied, she lost it. She was screaming, yelling, and eventually got detained when the neighbors called the cops. The cherry on top? During her meltdown, she confessed that she was just using me, that she never loved me, and admitted to sleeping around behind my back. Did I mention it was all caught on camera? Thank you, doorbell cam. They posted it. I started getting apology messages from her family, but nothing from her friends, so I sent them screenshots of the messages and a PG-rated photo. The messages also included her bad-mouthing most of them. After that, the other guy showed up at my house trying to break in and talk to me. He was drunk. I gave him a light lesson in self-defense and carefully restrained him. The police came and he was arrested. I also have cameras with audio, so he's looking at charges for assault, attempted breaking and entering, and violating a restraining order. So she's lost most of her family, friends, spent a night in jail, and her affair partner is heading to jail. I managed to land a contract for a month, which includes bonuses and a chance to get out of the country. I'm hoping this will help clear my head, and when I return, I'll be in a better place mentally. As for my friend and his wife, they left today, Monday, for the trip. I managed to get some of the more personal details of the trip changed to their names. I also arranged for the hotel to place a cheap camera and a note saying, "Remember to make lasting memories and document the journey." Second story. All right, folks, gather around for a story that's about to be as scandalous as a sizzling beef patty on a hot skillet. Now, let me start by saying that I'm usually a laid-back kind of guy. Always have been. But my ex-wife, she had a different perspective on our marriage. She seemed to treat it more like a loose suggestion rather than a true commitment. Quite a character, I tell you. It all began when I discovered that my dear spouse was having an affair with a fellow member from our fancy country club. Can you believe it? Our own damn country club, where we spent countless Sundays playing golf and enduring those never-ending brunches. And guess who it was? None other than Frank, the husband of that obnoxious duo Frank and Darla. Quite the soap opera, isn't it? Now, how did I uncover this secret? Well, it wasn't through some sneaky private investigator or a sudden burst of supernatural intuition. It was all thanks to her own incompetence. She had foolishly stored revealing photos and lovey-dovey emails in a secret email account on her phone, thinking she had covered her tracks. She believed she was the modern-day Mata Hari, but boy was she wrong. When I confronted her, she played the innocent card, denying everything until I laid my cards on the table. The photos, the emails, it was like witnessing a fragile porcelain doll shatter into pieces. All her facade crumbled, and she begged for my forgiveness. Quite the performance worthy of an Oscar. But I wasn't buying any tickets to that show. I made it clear to her that she was only sorry because she got caught, not because she genuinely regretted her actions. Her face turned pale, as white as a sheet. She asked me what my intentions were. I responded with a satisfying silence. It felt like being in a battle, and you wouldn't give away your strategies to the enemy, right? That's exactly how I saw it. I had declared a silent war that lasted a week. I acted as if everything was normal while she was a bundle of nerves, stumbling over her words and making more mistakes than a beginner juggler. Behind the scenes, I remained calm and collected, setting my plan into motion. I initiated the process of filing for divorce and had my lawyer working on the necessary details. I hadn't revealed this little piece of information to her yet, keeping my cards close to my chest. Then, the perfect opportunity presented itself. The quarterly banquet at the country club. Frank, the club president, and his irritating wife Darla were always by his side. I volunteered to give a speech at the event. I could practically hear my wife's heart pounding in her chest when I informed her. It was like watching a deer caught in the headlights, fear evident in her eyes. The day arrived, and there we were, dressed up to the nines, sitting among the town's elite. As I stood up to take the stage, I noticed my wife's knuckles turning white, clutching the tablecloth as if it was her lifeline. I began my speech by discussing the importance of taking control of one's life and not allowing circumstances beyond our control to shape or define us. Talk about irony, huh? The highlight of my speech involved distributing envelopes to everyone in the room with strict instructions to wait for my signal before opening them. The tension in the air was so thick you could practically slice it with a knife. All eyes anxiously shifted between the envelopes and me. My wife's expression resembled someone who had just encountered a ghost. Beads of sweat trickled down her forehead as she tightly held on to her unopened envelope while my speech reached its conclusion. Finally, I gave the command. The room fell into a hushed silence as members of the country club tore open their envelopes, and then chaos erupted. The envelopes contained the very pictures and emails I had discovered, exposing Frank's betrayal for all to see. My wife's deceit was laid bare, and poor Darla was left in a state of shock, witnessing her husband's treachery. All the skeletons that had been hiding in the closet were now dancing under the harsh spotlight. Frank appeared as if he had just swallowed a bug, his face turning a sickly shade of green. As for Darla, she stared at the photos as if they were some extraterrestrial artifact, her face transitioning from pale to flaming red. And my wife? Well, she found herself right in the eye of the shitstorm, her wide eyes reflecting pure horror. The aftermath was just as chaotic as you can imagine. Frank, the once beloved club president, was swiftly stripped of his title, faster than a race car zooming down a straight way. In the span of a single evening, He went from being the top dog to the town's biggest outcast. Darla was inconsolable, her sobs echoing through the hall. The realization that her husband had been playing her for a fool hit her harder than a ton of bricks. Now let's talk about my wife. She was quite the social butterfly, always surrounded by her circles. But all of that came crashing down in an instant. It was like witnessing a queen being dethroned. The news spread like wildfire throughout our town, and she became known as the homewrecker. The shame and humiliation were evident on her face, and I have to admit, I took quite a bit of satisfaction in that. Okay, let's be honest, I reveled in it. But the icing on the cake was when I announced my resignation from the club. Can you imagine? Not only did they lose their president, but they were also losing a long-standing member like myself. The room fell into a heavy silence, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. My wife looked at me with a mix of shock, betrayal, and desperation. But I had cut all ties with the club and with her. I packed up my life, took my online business, and relocated to a new city. It was a fresh start, leaving behind all the drama, lies, and heartache. My wife was left to face the consequences of her choices, and as for Frank, well, let's just say he had his own battles to fight. As for me, I finally gained my freedom from a toxic relationship and a suffocating town. In the end, you could say that my revenge was oh so satisfying, like indulging in a warm chocolate souffle fresh out of the oven. There's something satisfying about reclaiming control of your life and standing up for yourself. Maybe some would call it petty or harsh, but in that moment, I felt empowered and back in the driver's seat. No regrets, just valuable lessons learned, and a future filled with endless possibilities. Now let's catch up on what's happened 1 year later. Time for an update on everyone's lives. Let's start with the aftermath of my little surprise at the country club. Surprisingly, the divorce proceedings went smoother than anticipated. Thankfully, I had already established my online business before I met my wife, so I retained full ownership. She ended up with just a monthly maintenance payment, which, thanks to the success of my business, was more than manageable. Let's call it the price of pursuing love. As for my ex-wife, well, her attempts to find employment in a town where her reputation was tarnished didn't pan out. It seems being labeled the town homewrecker isn't exactly a desirable quality for potential employers. Eventually, she made the decision to pack up and leave, perhaps in search of greener pastures where judgment was less harsh. And as for Frank, oh boy, he got the short end of the stick. His divorce was far from favorable, resulting in him losing a significant portion of his business to Darla. It just goes to show that old saying is true. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Frank had to start over and rebuild everything from scratch. It's pretty wild how the order and timing of events can completely alter the trajectory of your life, huh? Now, let's move on to the more enjoyable part of this update, shall we? I've started dating this amazing woman who brings a breath of fresh air into my life compared to my ex-wife. But let me tell you, marriage is the last thing on my mind. Nope, been there, done that, got the souvenir. Right now, I'm perfectly content with dating, growing my business, and embracing the fun aspects of life. In fact, I've reignited my passion for playing the piano, something I had set aside during my marriage. It's incredible what you can achieve when you're not constantly tiptoeing through the minefield of matrimony. My current dream is to form an 80s retro wave band, just for the sheer joy of it. Who knows, maybe I'll even share some of our tracks here someday. So there you have it, folks. My life has taken a complete 180-degree turn, but I've emerged on the other side as a better and happier person with a renewed lease on life. Always remember that it's never too late to regain control and live life on your own terms. Well, luckily, Frank managed to escape with less damage than most people would. What do you all think? That revenge I sought was quite satisfying, but do you have any ideas on how it could have been even more impactful? I guess I'm not really sure what I'm hoping to get out of this post. Maybe I'm looking for someone who can make sense of why someone would cheat just 3 months before their wedding, and with a total deadbeat at that. I thought this might be a good place to spill the whole story and get it off my chest. So, rewind to 6 months ago. I walked in on my fiancé in bed with my buddy's brother, just 3 months before we were set to tie the knot. My fiancé, 24F, and I, 28M, had been together for nearly 6 years. The day I found out was 3 months before our wedding, and a few months before that, My fiancée had lost her job. Ever since I've known her, she's had a bit of a rough time holding down a job. She's never managed to stick with one for more than a year. Either she gets fired or she quits. And it was never her fault, or so she said. I always believed her because, well, I loved her. When you're in love with someone, you tend to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you put up with a lot more of their nonsense. I ended up giving her a part-time job at my shop, since I was the owner. It didn't take long for me to realize why she had such a hard time keeping a job. She was always late, always had an excuse, and never had the discipline to finish a task. She'd rather chat and socialize than work. But I looked past all these flaws because, well, I was in love with her. She was my first love, my first kiss, my first everything. We'd grown so much together over the past 6 years. Sure, we had our rocky moments, but I genuinely believed she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I couldn't, and still can't, imagine anyone else in my life. But she's left me with no other choice. 3 weeks before D-Day, we had our wedding shower. It was nerve-wracking, stressful, and all that, but we really did have a great time. We appreciated all the family and friends who came to show their support. It was our first event leading up to our May wedding, and it made everything feel much more real. During that time, we were often visiting the house of my best friend, whose younger brother had recently moved in with him. My fiancée struck up a friendship with him, this 21-year-old, let's call him Brandon. Now, Brandon is my best friend's younger brother, so even though some folks might raise an eyebrow at their partner being pals with someone of the opposite sex, I didn't think much of it. Brandon was living with his brother in a 2-bedroom house. He didn't have a job, so his brother was letting him crash there since he had the extra room, and Brandon wasn't keen on living with their mom anymore. Brandon's a pretty quiet, shy, and socially awkward guy. My fiancée, being the social butterfly that she is, would always say she was just trying to help him come out of his shell whenever she hung out with him. I'm a business owner, running a shop, and I work long hours, especially with the wedding expenses looming. Most of the guests coming to the wedding are from my fiancé's side. The only income my fiancée has is what I pay her for her part-time work with me. So, I'm footing the bill for 100% of the wedding expenses. All my fiancée was responsible for was the planning. My best friend is also in the same business as me, albeit on a smaller scale, and we sometimes share or borrow equipment from each other. A few months before our wedding, my fiancée started taking some hours off work. Her go-to excuse was always that she was planning something for our wedding. She'd use any excuse she could, and our wedding was no different. I knew that was a load of baloney, but I usually let it slide and ignored her because I didn't need her help most of the time, until it became a habit. One day, I needed to grab something from my friend's house. He'd borrowed one of my tools and left it in his garage. He was swamped with work, and since I needed it ASAP, I decided to swing by and pick it up myself. He told me that Brandon was home, but he might be sleeping because he's jobless. So he didn't want me knocking on his door all day. So he gave me his keys to let myself in and grab what I needed from his garage. I closed my shop before I left because I didn't have anyone to watch my store. My fiancée made her usual excuse that she was going to meet the planner for our wedding. It was supposed to be a quick drive to my friend's house. His garage door wasn't working, so I had to go through his front door, then through his corridor to access his garage. As I was walking towards the garage, that's when I heard moaning. It was clearly the sound of a woman. I smiled because I thought Brandon had scored. I didn't think he was capable of pulling a woman because he was so quiet and shy. Never in my wildest dreams did I expect the woman to be my fiancée. I moved through the garage as quietly as possible to not make any disturbance. After I grabbed what I needed, I headed back to the front door to exit the house, but stopped halfway when I recognized the sound of my fiancée. Immediately, it all added up in my head. I placed the tool on the corridor and slowly tiptoed closer to the room where the sound was coming from. The room wasn't far from the corridor, so after a few steps, I was right at the front door. Another clue that confirmed it was my fiancée was her shoes at the front of the door. Now I was certain it was her, and I was close enough to recognize that my fiancée was the woman moaning. I twisted the doorknob to open it, but it was locked. I had to force my way in and broke the lock. As soon as I forced myself in, I saw my fiancée trying to cover herself behind Brandon. Brandon was holding a clothes hanger to protect themselves. It's kind of funny looking back, but it wasn't funny to me at the time. When they realized the person who just barged in was me, my fiancée stepped out from behind him and started apologizing. At first, she said it was a drunken mistake. It had never happened before. She knew she messed up, and so on. I asked her if this is what she's been doing when she leaves the shop. Is this her idea of wedding planning? I asked her how long this had been going on, and she lied, saying it was the first time. I wanted to give Brandon a piece of my mind, but the kid is so weak and fragile that it's hard to believe he made a move on my fiancée. I figured she was the one who initiated it. I remember feeling a deep pain, realizing that for the past few months, I'd worked so hard to make enough money to pay for the wedding, and here she was, messing around with another guy. Nothing hurts more than finding out that all my efforts had been in vain. We were arguing in Brandon's room when he slipped away. I realized that having a conversation with her was pointless because she was lying through her teeth, even though she'd been caught red-handed. The more she lied, the angrier I became, and it started affecting me physically. My knees were shaking, and they felt like they would buckle. I started hyperventilating and stormed out of my friend's house to get some fresh air. I rang my buddy and spilled the beans about what I'd just discovered. I asked him how long he'd known about this. He swore on his daughter's life that he was as shocked as I was. I was at a loss for what to do next. I didn't feel like heading back to work that day, so I hit the bar to grab a drink and clear my head. My friend tried to reach me, but I was too lost in my thoughts to answer. I felt like a complete fool for not suspecting anything. I felt like a dunce for trying to marry someone I thought I knew after being together for 6 years. I thought that was enough time. My love for her had blinded me to her true colors. She could be selfish and demanding, and sometimes she'd put me down in front of our friends. But man, I was so head over heels for her that I didn't notice these flaws. All her negative traits started to stand out, things that I was totally blind to before I caught her cheating. Now, they were as clear as day. I had fooled myself into thinking that her job hopping was because her bosses were hitting on her, and when she turned them down, they'd fire her. That was one of the many excuses she'd feed me, and I swallowed it hook, line, and sinker because I was in love with her. In the days that followed, she tried to convince me that we didn't have to call off the wedding and that she would never talk to him again. She said that I'm the one she wanted to be with, and that she did this because I wasn't giving her the words of affirmation and affection she craved, and that I was always working. I told her that someone has to work around here. I was working for us to have a wedding, and Brandon was always available because he's jobless. I can't help but believe that this affair has been going on for a while. She insists I walked in on the first time, but they've been spending a lot more time together lately, and I've tried to overlook it, as I always thought they were just best friends. Once I told her that we had to part ways and I wanted her out of my house, her whole demeanor changed. Then it became, now that I've had time away from this house, I realize this isn't what I want, and I've been a coward by not telling you I've not wanted to be with you for a while. Honestly, it's painful, I found out. So, she never wanted to be with me, yet she was about to marry me in 3 months. We've already sent invitations to family and friends. Clearly, she was with me for what I could provide for her. She seemed to regret it at first, but that regret and guilt that she felt the first day has completely seemed to dwindle away, because it became clear to her that we are no longer going to get married and that I was going to kick her out of my house. She tried to rile me up by saying that she was going to move in with Brandon. Brandon, who's unemployed, shy, and can't even hold down a job, is mooching off his brother, and she's planning to move in with him? Brandon is living off his older brother, and they're both going to leech off him. I told her that she didn't think her affair through. I had a hunch that my best friend wouldn't risk our friendship by letting her stay. While she was packing her things to leave my house, I reminded her that she was fired. She retorted by saying that my business sucks and spouting all sorts of nasty things about my business, the same business that has been feeding her for the past month. Fast forward 3 weeks later. She's moved the last of her things out of my house and taken 2 of our 4 dogs with her. My house was a wreck, as she's took all of our living room furniture, our bedroom TV, dining room table, etc. Granted, she paid for some of it prior to us moving in together, and some was given to us by her godmother. However, she is taking every possible thing that she's justified in taking. She admitted to me that she and Brandon had serious feelings for each other. They continued to be intimate since I caught them the first time, and they continued to see each other for a few weeks after. After she moved out, she seems to show no remorse for what she did, and seems acting happier living in this fun little fling with this guy who has no job, no education, and lives with his brother. Fast forward a bit, and their cash flow started drying up, and they both couldn't land jobs. I had given her everything she could possibly need. I cared for her, even stepping into a parent-like role, which I think slowly eroded our love and affection. But the love I had for her is now a sad story best left in the past. She's diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder and struggles a lot with depression and anxiety. I've done my best to help her with her mental health over the past 6 years, but I think it's taken a toll on my own mental state. But that was just one of the sacrifices I made because I was so head over heels in love with her. 4 weeks after we split, she tried to move in with Brandon, but my best mate wasn't having it. When Brandon started sneaking her in behind my best mate's back, he booted both of them out, and Brandon ended up moving back in with his mom. It took about 2 months for the rose-colored glasses to come off, and then she realized she'd made a mistake. She called me and apologized, but I felt like my trust had been shattered, and I needed time to sort through my feelings. I think she only felt regret because she had to move back in with her parents and start job hunting. I was crushed when I caught her cheating, and the wedding cancellation hit her hard because most of the invites were sent to her family members. She tried to spin lies about why we broke up, even claiming we were both cheating on each other, but I sent a Facebook message to all her friends and relatives that I knew, telling them the truth. I took a financial hit because I'd already put down payments on some of the wedding expenses. Over the past few months, I've been focusing on myself, hanging out with friends and family, and starting to piece my life back together. I thought about my ex-fiancée a lot. I knew I couldn't just erase what had happened. About 2 months ago, she reached out to me out of the blue. She apologized again for what she had done and confessed that she had made a massive mistake. She said that she still had feelings for me and wanted to try to mend things. She told me that she and Brandon were no longer a thing. She suggested that we should take it slow and rebuild trust, promising that this time things would be different and she would do whatever it took to repair our relationship. I told her that I've moved on and there's no undoing the betrayal she put me through. She stopped reaching out when she found out that I've started seeing someone else.